Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to this second day of our annual Friends of Europe Security Summit, where we're looking at European defence and security in an age of disruption. Is Europe up to the challenge? I'm Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow here at Friends of Europe, and it is again my pleasure today to moderate the debate and the discussion, speaking to you from Town Hall Europe, the Friends of Europe Conference Centre here in Brussels. Well, is Europe up to the challenge? Yesterday, we tried to answer that question with a distinguished panel when it comes to European strategic autonomy. Here's a recap of the highlights of yesterday's debate. Those of you who were with us will no doubt once again enjoy seeing those highlights. And those of you who weren't with us yesterday, well, here's a chance to see what you missed.
Sometimes it's treated quite often as separation from something. We don't think that we should have some kind of separation. We should take more responsibility. And how we should do that? For that, in my view, we need to focus on three areas: responsibility, resilience, and readiness. 3R or 3R.
We know that for a few days or weeks, our security was depending on the decision and on the vote of a few thousand voters in Pennsylvania. Is it reasonable to still be that dependent without taking our own responsibilities, as the Lithuanian minister was saying?
I think have shown that we are able and willing to do things in Europe. Now that we have PESCO and we have the European Defence Fund, what we are seeing in those PESCO projects is that perhaps there's a way ahead that might be a bit different from the past. So the exception may become the rule in domains such as important, for instance.
It's about giving EU member states the option and ability, technological, industrial, operational, and political in the end, and this is interrelated, to be able to take action whenever needed to protect our values, to protect our citizens, and indeed to defend our interests, either together or with partners, notably NATO, wherever possible, or separately if required.
In my hat as Sakir, in my hat as the EUCOM commander, from a U.S. military perspective and from a European military perspective. The opportunities that I've had to work side by side with my French counterparts and my German counterparts, the relationship has never been stronger. The growth and capability of the mission sets inside of those militaries has never tried any harder to improve. And I feel like our campaign momentum with respect to our ability to get better each and every day is dramatically improving over time.
We should have in Europe, in Brussels, a very informal institution, I underline very informal, the European Security Council, which builds on ideas voiced by Chancellor Merkel and President Macron, but an informal body consisting of France, Germany, and the UK. And then we add on the Secretary General of NATO and the Chairman of the European Council. So that in time of a crisis, there is a start for the division of labor. Who is going to act? Is it the European Union? Is it NATO? Is it a combination of the two? Is it a coalition of the willing?
Well, today we're going to ask, is Europe up to the challenge in another area, which is adapting its security and defence, its economic and social well-being, its resilience to the demands of the digital age? In particular, we're going to ask if the domains of cyberspace and artificial intelligence are a wild west where anything goes, or whether norms, rules and standards are increasingly defining that area. And if they are they being applied and are they being respected? Can we build ethical values into military technology, or is the only solution for some military technologies to ban them altogether? How can we better deter attacks in the cyber domain, or is defense the only form of defense? How effective is our toolbox of measures to deter and respond to cyber attacks? And are the attackers getting the message? And finally, at a time when IT is governing our daily lives, particularly during the COVID-19 crisis, our ability to perform our jobs, to speak to our families, to do our shopping. How is the EU and how is Europe building in better resilience and better functionality to make these IT services more secure, more reliable, and more resilient? Now, to shed light on these thorny and weighty issues, we're going to have a session today in two parts. First of all, I'm delighted that Jodie Williams, the well-known Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the person who led the campaign, the worldwide ban on anti-personnel landmines back in the 1990s, and who has since turned her attention to the ethical dimensions of artificial intelligence, that Jodie Williams has agreed to contribute a message on that topic to us today, a video message which I invite you to look at first. And once we've seen that, it will be my pleasure to introduce our distinguished four panelists today, who will then enlighten us on the dimension of better governance of cyberspace. But first of all, with our thanks to Jodie Williams.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jodie Williams, and I am a recipient of the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. I shared that Peace Prize with the international campaign to ban landmines. And we received it because of our work, which resulted in the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty. Another development that came out of the work we did is a new focus for disarmament, a humanitarian disarmament that looks at the impact of weapons and war on civilians and not focusing on the never-ending power struggle between states for military supremacy as they struggle to keep the weapons they have and build newer, faster, better ones. Around 2010, different NGOs working on various arms control and disarmament initiatives became aware of the efforts to move beyond drones, to develop fully autonomous weapon systems, to develop killer robots. Each of us was truly stunned and truly freaked out. For us, fully autonomous weapons cross a moral and ethical threshold that is really unthinkable. And not just because people are willing to delegate life and death decisions about human beings to machines. For that and so many more reasons, some of which I'll elaborate now. Killer robots would lack inherently human characteristics such as compassion that are fundamental to making complex ethical choices. Nor would they have the human judgment necessary to evaluate the proportionality of an attack, to discriminate between civilians and combatants, nor would they be able to abide by the other core principles of the laws of war. Here's a really tricky one to think about. If a fully autonomous weapon carried out a war crime, who, if anyone, could be held responsible? Would it be the programmer of the weapon, the manufacturer of the weapon? Would it be the commander who unleashed the weapon? Or would it be the weapon itself? This accountability gap makes it difficult to ensure justice, especially for the victims. Another thought that scares us all is imagining how much easier it would be to go to war when human troops were replaced by machines. Families would not have to fear their children coming home in body bags. That development, which is called the third revolution in warfare, would further shift the burden of conflict to civilians. Fully autonomous weapons could also be used in other ways outside of armed conflict, such as watching the border, policing, suppressing nonviolent protests, propping up regimes. Force that would be intended as non-lethal could actually cause many deaths and much destruction. My country, I sigh, the United States, along with China, Israel, South Korea, Russia, and the UK are developing such weapons. If left unchecked, killer robots could further destabilize our very fragile global security, and the world could enter a robotic arms race. Do we really need another arms race, people? So for all these reasons and more, and with a focus on humanitarian disarmament, a group of us came together to create the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, the Campaign to Stop Fully Autonomous Weapon Systems in April of 2013. And it is because of our work that countries did come together to begin discussions about what to do about fully autonomous weapons. They're doing it through the Convention on Conventional Weapons, the CCW. The talks started in Geneva in 2014. But here we are, 6 years later. And despite the growing understanding of the need to stop the development and use of such weapons, no meaningful steps have been taken in the CCW to ensure that no matter the weapon, a human being must always make the target and kill decisions. Never, ever the machine itself. Unfortunately, the handful of states I already mentioned, those that want killer robots, is blocking the desire of dozens and dozens of states from around the world to work on a new international treaty to stop fully autonomous weapons, to stop killer robots. I was asked a question to think about for this summit, and it was to think about the utility of codes of conduct or guidelines to attempt to mitigate the incredible threats posed by killer robots. Turns out it's not a random question, because states in the CCW have been working on what they call the 11 guiding principles regarding emerging technologies and weapon systems. Probably not surprisingly, there is a problem. Some of the states see those principles as the end game in the CCW on dealing with killer robots. Many, many, many more states, however, see the principles as but one step on the road to an international binding treaty banning the weapons. Because of these differences, however, it has caused states to end up struggling with each other over the principles themselves and losing focus on what they are supposed to be doing, which is dealing with killer robots, dealing with these unpredictable and exceedingly dangerous weapons. If history is our guide, we should know by now that guidelines, codes of conduct do not work. I know it from my own work personally. The CCW landmine protocol, all it did was supposedly regulate the use of landmines. What actually happened, because it was regulations, was the immense proliferation and use of anti-personnel landmines. Just as regulations did nothing to stop landmines, they will do nothing to meaningfully stop killer robots from posing an unnecessary risk to humanity. They will not stop the destabilization of security. Guidelines and regulations will not make killer robots able to follow the laws of war, nor will they result in ethical killing machines. Guidelines and regulations will not stop the spoofing and hacking of killer robots, the results of which no one can predict. No one, not even roboticists. not even the roboticists we know and work with. Nobody knows what would happen. The EU should not put time, energy, expertise, and money into working on principles or guidelines on how best to use killer robots. That's insane. It should work to stop them. Twice now, the European has passed resolutions, once in 2014, once in 2018, calling for a ban on killer robots. Additionally, a provisional agreement was reached in 2019 that would prohibit the new European Defense Fund from investing in killer robots. This agreement now must be formally approved by the European Parliament and the European Council. We know you can do it. Please do so rapidly. We need you. The EU should follow the lead of the European Parliament and show dramatic leadership by forming a core of governments working together to ensure that fully autonomous weapons never, ever appear on the battlefield. That core group of EU governments should negotiate a treaty to ban killer robots. We must move beyond the endless and fruitless deliberations in the CCW. We must not be forced by a handful of nations to live in a world where autonomous weapons of war can decide who lives and dies. We are already suffering the indignity of a handful of states with nuclear weapons who refuse to give them up. How many more deadly weapons does this world need? Let's take a second as I finish and imagine a world where those resources are used not only to save the planet, but to save humanity. That those resources would be used to meet the needs of people, not the needs of war. Can you imagine what that world would be like? I can. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, Jodie Williams, thank you for that forceful, very, very clear message. Obviously, that is a topic that at Friends of Europe we'll take up in more detail at one of our upcoming events. Also, before I now turn to our panel, my technical colleagues here tell me that some of you are experiencing some echoing on YouTube on the video. Apologies for that, but we'll try to get that sorted out as quickly as we possibly can. And so now to our debate on how to make cyberspace more reliable and more secure. In order to look into that question, we have, as I said, 4 very distinguished panelists today. Before I introduce them, let me briefly reiterate, you've heard this message on 1,000 Zoom and WebEx and webinars over the last few months, but if you wish to ask a question, please write it in the chat, please raise your hand on Zoom, or for those of you following on the live stream, please go to the #key Security Summit. Friends of Europe, we always like to hear from you, and so please don't draw back, don't hold back, give us your questions as quickly as you can. That way there is a greater chance that I will be able to put that question to the distinguished panel. First of all, I'm delighted to welcome back to Friends of Europe a true friend of Friends of Europe, Jüri Lauk. He is the Minister of Defense of Estonia for the 3rd time. He's been Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's been Ambassador to NATO. I think I could say, Jüri, without any exaggeration, that you're one of Estonia's most distinguished statesmen and public servants since the recovery of your independence. And again, somebody who's been a great friend of ours. So thank you for accepting to be part of this Security Summit today. Another good friend of Friends of Europe will be after the Minister. That is Despina Spanu, who is the head of cabinet of the European Commissioner, Margarita Šinas. And Despina has a very long and distinguished track record of service to the European institutions behind her already. already, then I'm delighted that we have today a voice of the private sector, Katie Masouras, who is joining us from the United States. She is the CEO and the founder of Luta Security, but she also has a long track record of advising the Pentagon, the US government, US agencies, and she's even participated in Hack the Pentagon, which I imagine makes her an exceptionally qualified person to talk about cyber security. I'll have to ask her if she was successful at hacking into the Pentagon and what she found when she got there. And then finally, we have Kadri Kaska, who is the head of the law branch of the well-known NATO Cooperative Center of Excellence on Cyber Defense in Tallinn, Estonia. As everybody knows, you cannot have a credible cyber security panel without at least one Estonian. Today, we're lucky in that we have two, and we're very delighted to have them indeed. So, Minister, let's get our debate underway. And what I'd like to ask you specifically, as you give your introductory thoughts to us, is has Estonia learned, I imagine you have, some distinct lessons from the terrible experience that you went through in 2007 with the cyber attacks against Estonia, which really did put the strategic issue of cybersecurity on the map? What have you done to increase your resilience and make it less likely that that attack could happen to you again? And my second question, Minister, as somebody who thinks very hard, as I know, about defense issues, is do you think that the concept of deterrence, which we've applied in other areas of defense for many years, can that concept of deterrence work in cyber space, and how? And what do you think we have in our diplomatic toolbox that can be used to respond? Does any of this toolbox stuff actually work? So those are some pretty weighty, at least for me, questions to kick our session off, but you are definitely the right person to answer them. So again, delighted to have you with us today. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie, and very happy to be with you, my old friend, and with Friends of Europe. I really admire the work you are doing, and thank you for inviting me. Well, to be honest, I was attracted to the autonomous weapons system issues, so I would very much advise the Friends of Europe to take up this very and timely issue. I just use the opportunity to say that I don't agree with some of the things the distinguished speaker before me said, because we shouldn't allow only the bad guys have the weapons. But there is, of course, a debate what an autonomous weapon exactly means, etc., etc. Certainly issues to be discussed. Now, let me go direct to what you asked, Jamie. It is true that in 2007, Estonia was target of a cyber attack. I would say it was the first statewide attack where the object of the attack was a state, but also the perpetrator was a state. Of course, compared to present standards, the attack was fairly primitive. It was DDoS attack. They were mainly focusing on our public, public communication systems, home pages, trying to block the outreach of newspapers, state agencies, companies, banks. At that time, it was all very new to us, and it was quite shocking, although Estonia was already well developed when it comes to cyber systems, public use of various cyber opportunities, but also already we were opening the Cyber Center of Excellence of the Alliance, also opened in 2007, which showed that we valued international cooperation at that time as we value it today. Obviously, the whole experience made us well aware that although Estonian systems were up to date, considering the attack of that time, much needs to be done because the defender in cyberspace should be developing its defense capabilities as quickly as the attackers do. And as you know, the negative forces are always trying to find new ways to attack, and the warning time in a cyber attack is usually zero seconds, really. It can happen anytime and anywhere. So it's very important that your organization is working well. It should be a statewide organization encompassing both civilian protection of cyber systems as well as military protection of cyber systems. And Estonia, after the attack, created Information Systems Authority that coordinates cybersecurity all over the government, all over the state, I would say. And at the same time also started to build its cyber defense in the armed forces. And just last year, we created Cyber Defense Command, which is kind of the organizational body of military cyber aspects, which is completely the purview of the Ministry of Defense, while the other issues are mainly on the purview of Ministry of Economy. Let me just very quickly say that if you want proper defense, cyber defense, you need to invest. You need to invest in human resources. You need to invest in cyber security technology. You need to invest in joint training and exercises. You need to invest in international relations so that when an attack appears, everything is ready. Everything is ready to go. That is your best defense. Now, when it comes to deterrence, and you're absolutely right, Jamie, this is one of my favorite subjects. It is indeed true that in the cyberspace, it is comparatively more difficult to achieve deterrence than in the conventional military field, because there is a high degree of anonymity and deniability. Although I must say it's fair to state that at the moment this aspect has diminished. I mean, even if you cannot manage direct technological attribution, usually the circumstances taken in general give you a pretty good idea who the attacker is. And I think it's fair to say that we have lately been able to out or to show the cyber actions, the cyber attacks of numerous Russian entities, like an attack against Georgia, for instance. These attacks should be named, the attackers should be shamed. And of course, you also have to ask whether there should be additional measures like sanctions, which then can reinforce your capability to deter these attacks. Now, when we go to directly military purview, then of course, I think apart from the Russian aggression to eastern Ukraine, there hasn't been sort of a massive military use, purely military use of cyber attacks. So it was a combined situation in Eastern Ukraine. It was conventional and unconventional. Otherwise, I think it's fair to say that we have been spared of massive military-grade cyber attacks, largely because there is also a balance of fear. And every attacker knows that their own defenses are also not to the level to forestall the response of another state actor. So states are actually careful, and they are afraid of blowback should they decide to start a major cyber quote unquote war. And so it's, I think, fair to say that there are massive capabilities, especially among the big powers, but also smaller powers. Even Estonia has certain capabilities, but nobody wants to start an attack which in the end might be the real blow to the attacker, the real catastrophe for the attacker. I will conclude here. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much, and thank you for answering my questions head on. Moderators always appreciate that, as you know. Defense has to go at the speed of the attack. Coordination is vital, so are investments. Deterrence is difficult, but can operate, maybe increasingly, in the cyber domain. And you gave us, I think, two excellent examples to reflect on. So, Minister, thank you for getting us off to such a good start. We'll come back to you, no doubt, in the discussion very shortly. Now I also turn to the more civilian aspects of building resilience, particularly for the millions of EU citizens who increasingly depend upon information technology. In order to discuss that, we have Despina Spanu. I've introduced Despina already. You have now joined us, so thank you as always. As I said in my introduction, you're a good friend of Friends of Europe. What I wanted to ask you, Despina, is has COVID-19, with this increased sort of connectivity and reliance upon IT, has it increased the number of cyber vulnerabilities? Are we seeing something new, or is it largely more of the same? And as, of course, you've been working on these issues in the European Commission, in the European institutions for many years, what can the EU do to increase our cyber resilience for all of our citizens? And as you take forward, Despina, your work on the security union in the EU, how does sort of cyber security fit into the overall picture of defining a future security union? So those questions are big for me, but you will, I know, have all of the good answers. So over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for introducing me as a friend of the Friends of Europe. Indeed, I'm a friend, and you are friends of the European institutions, always picking up the right topics and the right people. From what I see in these 2 days that I have been following this summit, and well done for this initiative. It is really very timely to discuss security. This is what the reality shows us. And this is what actually is on the agenda of the European Commission since July. You know that we put forward the very first strategy on the security union. This is a concept that the heads of state created for the Commission some years ago, but it has now been embodied in a real strategy, the strategy of the von der Leyen Commission that the Vice President that I work for, Vice President Skinas, is responsible for. And I will start from the end of your questions and then work my way through
Absolutely.
to the COVID question, because maybe we need to start from the basics and then go to today. So basically what we are trying to do through the Security Union work is indeed break these silos of considering cybersecurity as something that is separate from the rest of the security, as something that is only about protecting information systems. Cybersecurity is about security. It has a lot of components. It has the components of external relations, diplomacy. The minister just spoke about that. This is a very important component also of the Europe.
Hello, Despina?
Yes.
Oh, you're back. Sorry, you froze for a moment, and I froze too when I saw you freeze, but you're back, so please continue.
Where did you miss me?
No, you were saying that cybersecurity is about much more than IT protection, and it's about a much greater dimension of security.
Absolutely. So it is not just about protecting information systems. It is really about security. We have, first of all, the element of diplomacy and external relations. The Minister of Estonia just spoke about that. This has been the traditional way of European security policy. It has always been part of our external relations policy, defense and security. And slowly through the years, we realized we cannot have a European internal market without ensuring security. We cannot have a European Union of peace without putting security at the forefront. We also had some reality checks, big terrorist attacks, cyber attacks, and we also had the creation of the so-called digital single market, which imposed on us to look at cybersecurity as a component of protecting also the internal market. So in the European Union, we have come a long way now. We have what we call the European security area, and the Security Union strategy tried to put all this together and actually lifted up cybersecurity from being merely about protecting systems to being about security issues. As you know, in the European Union, we have started working on the basics. And the basics are our critical infrastructures. You know that in the EU, we have a model piece of legislation. It is one of a kind. In my previous functions as Director for Cybersecurity, I traveled the world speaking about the NIS directive, the directive that is about how we need to protect our information systems of critical infrastructure, creating obligations for public authorities, but also for operators. And I will come back to that. This is a model law. It is unprecedented that 27 countries believe and have to abide by one cybersecurity law that imposes on them to have a cybersecurity strategy at national level, to have emergency response teams, imposes on operators of critical infrastructure to report cyber attacks. So this is a unique model that has been working for the last 3 years since the implementation of the directive in Europe. And we are now about to renew it, revise it, and make it even better. And as you know, the European Commission will come forward with a package on cybersecurity on the 15th of December, and the revision of this cybersecurity law will be part of it. But it will come together with the revision of the law about the critical infrastructure altogether, because it is impossible to divide security systems, information systems, and physical security anymore. If you look at what is critical infrastructure, for instance, in the area of energy or in the area of transport, it is impossible to divide the physical from the information security. So we are going to try and align the legislation on critical infrastructure so that it is equal across the board, at least at its scope and at its approach. So this is one thing where in Europe we have been at the forefront. The minister just spoke about the importance of trying always to be ready, because you never know when cyber attacks will happen. And this is what the European Union has been working on. The Cybersecurity Act is about that. You spoke about security also at the level of the citizens. In Europe, again, we are at the forefront of trying to introduce certification for systems, for connected products, for the Internet of Things, the billions of connected products that are in our home and can be used against us, unfortunately. So it is very important that we also not forget what we have done with the Cybersecurity Act, which brought forward certification and which created an even stronger cybersecurity agency, ENISA, that is there to bring together the European Union governments to work in preparation. We have cyber exercises across Europe every 1 or 2 years, to coordinate at all levels to implement what we call the blueprint, which is how the EU coordinates response in case we have major cyber attacks, etc. So all this we will put together in an EU cybersecurity strategy, the cybersecurity strategy that is part of the Security Union under the von der Leyen Commission, also to be adopted on the 15th of December. So watch that space. There is a lot more coming.
We certainly will. We certainly will. That date is noted, Desvita.
And I'm happy to come and tell you more, because in that strategy, we will also go much further. We will address, for instance, the incredible shortage of skills we have in cybersecurity. Unless you have a buildup of skills by pooling expertise from the private sector, from academia, from the public sector, from the research community, none of us will be able to make it. Neither the private sector that needs the support of the public authorities, neither the public authorities that cannot pay the same salaries as the private sector for cyber experts and that rely on the know-how that comes from those that are being attacked actually and need to protect their systems. So we will be also developing that. We will be developing more the notion of defense when it comes to the European interests. And we will also go further into the work of the new Cybersecurity Center, the first ever European Cybersecurity Competence Center that will lead the work of the European Union in research in cybersecurity, the skills area that I mentioned, and again, will create a community of anything that is about cybersecurity in Europe, be that a private center or a research academic center or a public authority. So we are bringing everyone together. We're creating a true community, and more about that in our strategy. Now, what has COVID?
It's been a thank you. Thanks. You doing a fantastic amount. It's very impressive. But it's so that we can get some questions in. And I say this in friendship and politeness because we know each other well. But could you just take 1 minute, please? Because I want you also to be able to get some questions from the audience as well. I mean,
absolutely.
With what the EU is doing, clearly we could have a whole session just on this because it's very, very rich indeed. But we need to. We've got 2 more speakers, and we, as I said, I promised the audience that they will have the opportunity to put some questions to you too.
So last point, just on COVID. COVID was a test case. It could have been a disaster for our systems. We saw that the resilience that we have built is working. We had some major cyber attacks in the healthcare sector with hospitals. Now in the pharmaceutical sector, we saw vaccine research laboratories being attacked, but this didn't spread much further. And that shows that we do have a resilience that has been built and that is helping us. So it has been a test case, but it has not been a disaster.
Despina, thank you very much indeed. As I said, it was extremely rich. We could have a Friends of Europe session on each of these interesting European initiatives. What I take from you is that we cannot separate the digital and the physical worlds. We have to understand the connectedness. You rightly pointed out, with me focusing on IT, that cybersecurity is about security and much more than simply about IT. The way in which the EU is driving the standards and building a common community aligned across the board, and you whetted our appetite for the 15th of December, a cyber Christmas present for all of us who are interested in this, when you come up with your very ambitious new package of measures. So we'll have you back with more time to go into those things. But thank you very much, Despina, for the time being, for joining us. Now I come to Katie Masouris. Katie, as I mentioned, is over in the United States. It's always essential, given the critical role of the private sector in devising the technologies, in operating them, very much determining how we're going to use them. So it's so important that we listen to a private sector perspective. But as I mentioned, Katie has worked for the government as well, so she knows how both sides see each other. And what I wanted to ask her is that, from your perspective, Katie, are these public-private partnerships that everybody always talks about with cybersecurity, are they working well? If not, how could they be improved? In the private sector, what do you want governments to do or not do to make your life easier? And what can governments do you think, to sort of also improve the kind of environment in which you can operate? And finally, there's often a lot of criticism of cyber technology not having security by design built in. Security has to be retrofitted later, and that's always more complicated. So can we marry effective, good commercial products, which we can all afford and which are very easy to use, all of those wonderful apps? Can we sort of marry that cyber convenience, in your view, with effective cybersecurity as well? So those are your exam questions for today. But again, I know that you're going to answer them extremely well. Thanks for being patient. Thanks for joining us from the US, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to join all of these distinguished guests and to be part of this event. So thank you. You asked probably about a dozen questions in those 4 or 5 questions. So I'll start with the role of public-private partnerships and how it's been going. And I would say that over the course, as we develop in parallel, the cybersecurity world has been developing and become more and more important and inextricably entwined with our society across all levels, we've struggled to catch up at the government level and at the regulatory level, because the pace of policy creation is not the pace of the internet or certainly cybersecurity. So I think that, as we have emerged in this new era, it's been interesting to see, as I've become more involved in policy work, the level of policy integration with technology and technologists. I think that more governments are seeing the value of embracing exchange programs, with active technologists who are working in the field, especially working at the cutting edge of technology, at the innovation edge, but also working at great scale. Because a solution that a policymaker envisions that may work on a small scale, or at least the scale of one individual country, depending on the country size, often will not work when applied globally. And that's something that we need to measure, especially on the unintended consequences of some of our policy decisions in technology, and especially cybersecurity. So one of the events that I was honored to be able to participate in as a negotiator was the Wasan Arrangement renegotiation and redefinition of some of the cybersecurity controls. And several years ago, 2013, the Wasan Arrangement group had basically introduced some new export controls on effectively cybersecurity surveillance technology. And what they thought was a very narrowly described, very distinct piece of technology that they were trying to regulate and could be well defined. It was much like the equivalent of regulating not just combustion, but the chemical reaction of oxidation, when it came to computing, and it over-regulated. And so I, along with Ian Mulholland, were two technologists that were brought into the policy fold to help explain the unintended consequences of that overregulation. And we understood where it was coming from, the human rights abuses with surveillance technologies as it's become more accessible to non-nation states and smaller actors. Certainly governments were concerned about the use of this technology in an offensive manner, but governments also wanted to preserve the ability, as they should, to be able to use these types of technologies in their own defense and for their own, defensive purposes, to defend their nations. So the conflict that arises between nations needing to get a handle on what kinds of regulation is desirable versus what kinds of regulation is even technically possible. I think that that intersection really needs to be closely examined, because it's not good enough to just call up any technologist. Certainly technologists were consulted in the original creation of those particular problematic clauses in the Wasan Arrangement, but they were not specialists. They were not specialists in vulnerability disclosure, which I am a specialist in that area, and they were not specialists in incident handling at the speed of cybersecurity. And one of the examples that we had to use to convince this body of the fact that we needed to clarify this regulation was WannaCry, and the fact that that worm ripped through infrastructure around the world. And, in fact, the patch had been available for several months before that worm had ripped through. And practitioners and defenders around the world needed to coordinate in real time, could not take the time to fill out export control applications and have the various governments approve them. We needed a global response. And to enable a global response at scale, we need international cooperation at the government level, at the policy level, and also at the technology level. And we need both technologists who understand the cutting edge and technologists who understand the broader picture. And you mentioned in the intro of me earlier about my hacking career. Certainly, I enjoyed being a professional hacker for many years, for about 7 years of my career of over 20 years in cybersecurity. But retiring from hacking computers was really an opportunity for me to then start hacking policy, start hacking governments. And that is the context under which I actually did hack the Pentagon I did not sit down at my keyboard and break into the Pentagon. I hacked the hearts and minds of the leaders of the Pentagon, and together with some folks who worked inside the Pentagon, we hacked some bureaucracy to create the very first program that embraced hackers in such a way that, you know, if you see something, say something. But it was the very first time the US government had opened its arms to the help of helpful hackers. And I think that that was a very important first step 4 years ago in the creation of Hack the Pentagon. So I'm more of an architect now than a hands-on hacker, but that is part of the evolution that we all have to embrace, you know, as we grow up together in this interconnected society. So with that, I'm sure we'll have wonderful questions. And you asked me 17 other questions, which I will get to, I suppose, during the rest of this panel. So
absolutely, Katie, and it was unfair
you.
of me to ask you so many things, but of course, want to take advantage of the privilege of being able to listen to you today. This idea that you have to hack minds rather than hack computers to achieve good cybersecurity, it's a very sort of alluring idea. But thank you, and I think your point that the policy level has to catch up with the technical level, and policy makers have to consult technological experts to make sure their solutions can really work and can be implemented. That sounds like good advice. I also like the idea that, you know, even if we deal with something like WannaCry, the solution is there. It's already out there. We just, you know, but like the needle in the haystack, we need to sort of find it and find it fast. No, thank you. Also, again, ladies and gentlemen, the audience, please come forward with questions and points, because we'll be getting into the discussion very soon after Kadri's remarks. And so please don't leave it to the last minute. It helps me if I can have some good oversight of who wants to come in with what kind of question and to whom. So now we go to Kadri Kastner, who is our legal expert. I wanted to ask you, Kadri, are we making progress in promoting sort of a good state behavior in cyberspace? Is this idea sort of catching on from a text to reality? Are there any prospects, do you think, anytime soon in the United Nations or elsewhere that we could have a sort of international treaty and regime regarding sort of responsible state behavior and good internet governance? And if we're not going to get it in the UN, what would be the diplomatic alternatives, do you think? And you work, of course, a lot on international law, and the Center of Excellence has produced these 2 Tallinn manuals that are universally cited when it comes to clarifying how international law applies to cyberspace. Do you think those manuals have produced a good impact in terms of, you know, really achieving, at least among the democracies, a common sort of set of norms and standards? And you mentioned when I spoke to you the other day that the centre is thinking of a Tallinn Manual 3, which sounds very enticing. So what would that be about? Was that because you got something wrong in the manuals 1 and 2 that you need to correct? Or is it because there's some sort of gap that you discovered in the international law that a Tallinn Manual 3 can now usefully plug? So again, thanks for being so patient, Kadri, for waiting, but at least you could get the final word.
Thanks so much, Jamie, for this kind introduction and definitely very intriguing questions. Good afternoon to everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to share this afternoon in the virtual room with you with such bright minds and diverse, but definitely very complementary perspectives, as you just heard. And we didn't compare notes with Katie, but I'm intrigued to hear her tech and private sector perspective connect a great deal with government and legal perspective represented here. Although I must admit I've never hacked the Pentagon. But to come to your question, Jamie, have we made progress in terms of international law and accepting a rules-based cyberspace? This is, of course, a perfect occasion to come with a lawyer answer. Yes, but. We've definitely made progress over the past decade, from the rather confused notion just 10 years ago, even, of cyberspace space being a wild west. There's broad international support to the UN reports released in 2013 and 15, adopted by the UN General Assembly, on the responsible state behavior in cyberspace, which, as you may remember, identified a list of cyber norms, of rules and principles of international law, and confidence building measures for states' conduct in cyberspace. And importantly, this recognized that A, that international law applies to cyberspace, and B, which international law rules apply. The UN Charter states must respect each other's sovereignty. They shall not intervene in the other's internal matters, including in their democratic processes. It is prohibited to use force, for example, to cause destructive cyber attacks against critical infrastructure or essential services such as energy or healthcare, and so on. And likewise, a number of international and regional organizations, NATO and EU included, have made solid statements recognizing the applicability of existing international law to cyberspace. And of course, we debate the extent and implications of these rules, and states have difficulty translating between the legal norms and the real-life scenarios. And then you always have those that are attempting to test the limits, but the fundamental recognition that we are operating in a domain governed by rules is there. And that is actually why any new treaty wouldn't really make or fundamentally help, because the same questions would inevitably rise anyway. We will not be any less challenged in a debate over a new treaty and how those rules should be defined and how that will be implemented and how does that actually translate into state conduct than we are in applying the international law, the UN Charter and other treaty and customary rules that are already there. So, and now we come to the yes, but part. States are in a plight because they have simultaneous conflicting interests on the one hand, and then to further complicate matters is that there's little assurance over how their commitments today will impact their tomorrow. So on the one hand, I mean, it's no question or not really a debate to anyone that stability in cyberspace is absolutely essential given the socioeconomic significance that digital infrastructure carries for societies. I mean, sustaining our way of life even during this pandemic would be largely unthinkable or unimaginable without reliable digital tech. So from this perspective, of course, states benefit from clear rules of the game. But then on the other hand, there's the state's desire to retain certain freedom of action in cyberspace towards their strategic competitors. And from this perspective, it's useful not to spell out overly clear positions, because each such clear red line drawn for the opponent is also a red line drawn for oneself. So I can understand this kind of a keenness to hold on to certain normative ambiguity. And we shouldn't, in the end, also forget that we are talking about an evolving domain that is still very far from maturity. We don't know how a restriction or a permission or an obligation that we define as normative today, or that we consider rather wise to not define or refrain from defining, will impact the environment and our own operation tomorrow. So as a dear colleague of mine uses for metaphor, we are all fixing from the outside an aircraft already in the air and route a destination that we quite don't know yet either. So what has the role of the academic input been in this this situation where the states are sometimes reluctant to move ahead? What the Talent Manual first edition did, and the second one even more so, was to identify existing international law in treaty law, in customary law, in jurisprudence that applies to state conduct in general, and therefore also applies to the way states interact with each other in the digital space. So it, in many regards, brought the discussion on the legal norms up to speed. It deepened our understanding of existing law, what the law is objectively, and it stimulated the states to develop their informed positions. But in the end, it's the states that make law, so not academics. So it is obvious that states have to move forward and figure out what they, how to so mitigate or how to reconcile these opposing or conflicting interests. So I have plenty more to say, but we also have a discussion ahead. So
Kadri, thanks very much. I mean, I like this idea that because technology is moving so fast, it's almost that you're outside the aircraft, balancing on the wings, trying to fix the plane as it continues to fly through the air. You can't sort of stop cyberspace or halt it in order to sort of fit the security in and then press the go button and it starts up again. So that's a challenge. Thanks for explaining very well from a lawyer's point of view what the challenges are in a way that a non-lawyer like me found very, very clear and convincing. It's good to say that we have an agreed set of norms among a number of states today. Applying them is something else. But you also usefully raised this issue of, are red lines helpful here? We all like clarity, but if it means that then we say you can attack me up to this level and I won't do anything as long as you don't attack me above that level, yes, indeed, we may not necessarily be helping ourselves. So this balance between clarity and ambiguity. So Kadri, thank you. We now come to, as I mentioned, the questions and discussion. First of all, I know today that we have a representative of Europol, which has, of course, a very important cybercrime center, which has received a lot of attention, Eduardas Skiris. Eduardas, I hope you're still with us. And I wanted, because of the important role that Europol is playing, to give you an opportunity to come into the debate with a question or some comments to kick us off if you are there and are still happy to do so. So if so, then please start speaking immediately and the camera will switch to you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear us.
We can indeed, Eduardas. Loud and clear. Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's a real important topic, and it's clear that we can create much more things than we can regulate at the moment. So for sure, and for that, we need to be innovative and to look for different approaches and different solutions. And of course, just now we released Europol and Trend Micro, our report related to use and misuse of artificial intelligence. And of course, there are much more questions than answers. So for sure, and I would like to underline a role of law enforcement and Europol as well in this area.
Thanks, Eduardas. Anything else? No, that's it. So thank you very much. No, thank you. It's good to see you. Alex on the Twitter feed, I think, was also looking to come in. So Alex, if you're there, can somebody feed your question in? Please, Alex, you're there. Alex Mahoney, our dear colleague here at Friends of Europe. So what are you picking up, Alex, that you want to feed into the discussion?
Yes, thank you, Jamie, and good afternoon, everybody. So our Twitter question today asks, more than just assessing violations, how can the EU and the international community hope to enforce agreements or impose sanctions, especially with rogue nations or nations protecting rogue agents?
Okay, thanks, Alex. That's a big question. I think that would go to the minister and if she's still with us, Despina in the first instance, and I'll bring others in. Minister, sanctions, I mentioned the toolbox, and do they really help to make countries sort of desist from attacks, or because these are relatively sort of low cost, high gain, do they continue even if we impose fairly stringent sanctions? Be useful to get more of your thinking on that, and Despina from the EU perspective, because the EU External Action Service, of course, has developed this toolbox of diplomatic responses. So be interesting to hear how effective that's proved to be so far. So Minister Loke first, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the sanctions are actually quite effective. The problem with sanctions, not only regarding cybercrime, but regarding almost everything, is that it is difficult to measure their success. It is, from my point of view, for instance, it's evident that the sanctions against Russia regarding Ukraine have worked to slow down or to limit Russian aggressive intentions. But of course, you cannot prove it mathematically. I think the same goes to EU imposing sanctions against cyber attacks, for instance. I think these cyber attacks, if we wouldn't react, they would grow exponentially. But if we react, and if we call out these actors, and if we put various restrictive measures on them, both against individuals and entities, I think that is really, really useful. And as we know, the Council has decided to impose restrictive measures. They include attempted cyber attacks against the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and of course, attackers known as WannaCry, NotPetya, Operation Cloud Hopper. There are travel bans, there are assets freezes. I think we should continue in the same path. Now, when it comes to real rogue nations as such, as I said, when we are talking about the nation-to-nation attacks, then you remember, Jamie, that for a long, long time in NATO, there was a discussion whether the cyber attack can raise to Article 5. And I'm a firm believer that it can. It can nowadays expose massive damage to a country, to a society, damage which we haven't luckily seen as of yet. And this, to my extent, can raise easily to Article 5. The question is, of course, how do we respond? What are the means of our response in that area? Thanks.
Thanks, Minister. I'm tempted to ask you if a cyber response is, an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth is best, or whether you think that maybe responding in an economic or some other way is more likely to be successful.
As I said before, I've no doubt that cyber response can be extremely effective. But as I said, this can very quickly escalate. So it depends really on the severity of the attack. What response measures do you choose? There are no countries, big or small, who would be well protected against a massive attack of another nation state. As I said, this simply hasn't happened yet, because while some of the military networks might be well protected, most of the civilian networks can be disrupted if enough computing power is used. And with the development of artificial intelligence, of course, the attackers will be gaining an extremely powerful tool in breaking encryption and creating havoc in ways we have not been seeing yet.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you. Despina, the toolbox and EU response measures. And while you have the floor, I'd be very tempted, because you mentioned the next revision of the NIST, the Network Information Security Directive of the European Union. And on that one, is the private sector sort of happy to cooperate with the standards that the EU is coming up with, because the private sector sees that better cybersecurity ultimately is in its interest, or do the companies still prefer to sort of do it their way with purely a voluntary approach? So I hope you don't mind if I feed that personal question in as you respond. Is Despina still there? She is indeed. I think I could still see her picture in a corner. Despina, can you hear us? You're there. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Now I think you can also hear me.
Absolutely. Yes.
Very good. So absolutely, I can answer both questions with pleasure. On the international scene and diplomacy that has been spoken about, again, if we're going to start treating cybersecurity as a matter of security, international law has to apply in cyberspace. And I think this is the approach that the European governments have been taking. And indeed, we have the cybersecurity diplomacy toolbox. Diplomacy has always been the #1 tool of offense for the European Union. We always go first for the friendly offense. In addition to that, we went for something more concrete, as you know, with a decision that allows member states to take sanctions. We have had 2 decisions of this kind until now. One in July 2020 and one in October 2020. And we have now a total of 8 persons, 3 entities and 1 body designated that fall under these sanctions. So we have some teeth now in our tools. But on top of that, again, the European Union always being an entity, a union of engaging with the world, we also have established cybersecurity dialogues with many jurisdictions in the world. And with the US, we had started, with Canada, we have with Japan. So this is also something that we need to continue engaging in an effort to create also collaborations with our partners. So cybersecurity should be no different. So this is the way I think the EU can move forward, more dialogue, more establishing tools, and also capacity building for the countries that need it the most. So we're also investing European funds to help countries, for instance, the ASEAN countries or others, to invest in cybersecurity. Now, when it comes to the private sector and how far they have accepted what the NIS has done, you're right that there are some sectors that had traditional models of collaboration at the level of the sector. For instance, the financial institutions. We have a lot of established groups of banks that exchange information. They obviously did not have the culture of exchanging that with public authorities, and there is a level of trust that has to be built, but there is an obligation now under the NIS directive. Member states are supposed to monitor. It seems to be working. We have incidents being reported more and more. And I think this helps also other types of critical infrastructure like the healthcare sector that did not have this culture to get into it. This is why actually we are financing from the new multi-financial framework, but also from the previous one we had started doing that, the creation of ISACs, so of those kind of collaborative groups of sectors that can come together, work together, and then create this culture vis-a-vis the public authorities as well of reporting incidents, because in fact, this is the only way we can prevent them from spreading, and this is the only way we learn from them.
Thank you. Despina, thank you for taking my question as well. We're almost out of time, ladies and gentlemen, but there's still 2 people who want to come in, so I want to give them, blitzschnell, please, the opportunity. First of all, to Athan Cosmopolis, if I've got your name wrong, Athan. If I haven't, then I beg forgiveness. And then Stephen Hill. So both of you, please, together, super fast questions, and then to the panelists, super fast answers, because we need to wrap up. But Athan, you first, please.
Thank you, sir. You got the name. Good afternoon from Athens, Greece, and the Ministry of Digital Conventions. I would like to ask His Excellency, the Estonian Minister of Defense, since with regard to situational awareness and incident response, it is considered of outstanding importance, intelligence and information sharing between the EU member states. What do you think we should do to promote this intelligence and information sharing, since we do find a considerable obstacles in exchanging information? Thank you very much.
Okay. Athan, thank you. Thanks for that good question. Intelligence sharing is key. Stephen, please, just as fast as Athan, if you don't mind. And to whom would you want to put your question?
Thanks very much, Jamie. Hello from the other side of the Atlantic, where there are a lot of friends of Europe as well. I wanted to ask about autonomous weapons and maybe broaden it out to military uses of artificial intelligence. Clearly in the US and also on the EU, there have been various ethical and legal frameworks that have been put forward. What scope do you see, and maybe this is a good question for the minister, for transatlantic dialogue on this issue? Is this something where it could be ripe for transatlantic discussion going forward?
Stephen, it's good to see you again, and it's a pity it can't still be in Brussels like in the good old days, but you look fine and well. So, Minister Yuri, the 2 questions were essentially to you, but I also want to give Katie and Kadri 1 sentence, and I'm sorry it can't be more, if you want to add a final word before I wrap up. So, Yuri, please.
I mean, exchanging information and the situational awareness internationally, especially among allies, is obviously crucial. And we started from people not trusting each other and really hiding this kind of information to sharing it quite openly with other allies. But of course, there are security concerns. I think we all have to guarantee that the information we share with our allies is used, and there are no information leaks. Information security is really crucial in this line of work. When it comes to artificial weapons, indeed, I believe we should look into transatlantic dialogue and transatlantic cooperation. I have an instinctive feeling that there will be less limitations in the United States in developing weapons related to artificial intelligence than in Europe. I feel that in Europe, especially in the European Parliament, there is a huge, or not a huge, but there is a community of people who already want to put restrictions on it. I would be very careful because, as I said, the really bad actors like Russia or perhaps China are really not swayed by these moral concerns. That's why I'm always saying it's better to have the weapons and not to use them than not to have them. But it's a long debate and obviously subject for another whole conference. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll get back to that. Yuri, thanks very much. So Katie, one line, and Kadri, if you wish, one line. And I apologize, we don't have time for more.
Well, thank you. We didn't get a chance to talk about ways to address the cybersecurity workforce shortage. And I did want to spend one sentence discussing the fact that we are not going to be able to meet any of these challenges going forward, and in terms of deciding some of these important pathways to protecting ourselves and defending ourselves as we as a society co-evolve with our dependence on cybersecurity. So the way that I believe that the cyber workforce shortage can be addressed is not in requiring additional certifications and all of these types of bars. It's frankly in creating pathways for cross-training across all industries. We need nurses and doctors who are versed in cybersecurity to help us as cybersecurity professionals understand how to best protect them, etc. So when we discuss all of these very large challenges that we have to, protecting our infrastructure in the world that we depend on, I think that our workforce shortage needs to be something that we concentrate on with more than just an approach of inviting hackers. It is not just my people, the hacker people that I am the ambassador for. I mean, really, it's all of us that need to come together and train across all industries in cybersecurity to be able to meet these challenges for the future.
Yeah, it's everybody's responsibility, and everybody has to have at least some sort of basic skills and familiarity. Kate, that is a message that's well heeded, and we'll come back to that. So, and Kadri, again, in one sentence, if you wish a final thought, it's only fair to give you the last word.
Thank you, JD. I described the dilemmas that states have balancing the socioeconomic value sought from digital infrastructure and then retaining the freedom of maneuver. And one thing that we shouldn't forget is that technology is actor agnostic. It is a very democratic in that sense. There is no such thing as principally exclusive uses of digital technology. Exploits, vulnerabilities will never remain exclusive for long. And the only advantage would be one of technological superiority for them. But I would argue that the West and Europe in particular cannot lay claim to that either. So it's not like you have to pick them in an order of importance, whether you want to gain the socioeconomic benefit or whether you want to have the strategic ambiguity to shape the environment. At the end of the day, a rules-based international order, also in the digital domain, will be our sort of
our best line of defense.
Security guarantee. There's no debate.
Yeah. Exactly. So go back to your democratic strengths. I think that's a very good message, Kadri, to end on. My thanks to the panel. Thanks very much indeed, as always, for contributing your time, but above all, your expertise, your insights, your knowledge, which clarified the situation for me considerably. My takeaways are that there are a lot of basic things that we can do. Number one. Number two, that there's no immediate solution because, as Kadri said, we have to fix the plane while we fly it. We can't land it temporarily in the meantime. Deterrence can work. That was I think an important message. There's the toolbox the EU is developing is having an impact as well. The EU is definitely not asleep at the wheel. We heard from Despina from that. We can build more effective public-private partnerships and learn more from the technological expertise of the private sector. And finally, we can build a kind of democratic ecosystem based on international law that may not convince everybody, but certainly it will give us massively more weight in the international debate on the future of cyberspace. Goodbye for now from the Security Summit, but there is one final event for those of you who are the hardcore fanatics. That's all of you, of course. Please come back tomorrow, as you see, when we'll be doing Space, the Next Frontier, moderated by my colleague, Dharmendra Kamani. That will be at 2 o'clock tomorrow, our final session. But as you could see, our horizons going into outer space are ever expanding. But for now, thanks again to everybody for watching, for participating. Stay safe and see you back here soon.